Thanks for coming out. I hit Manhattan as a teen terror in 1976, inspired by the manic ravings of Lester Bangs and Cream Magazine, the Velvet Underground, sarcastic wit, the glamour of the New York Dolls' first album, and the poetic scat of Piss Factory, and not much else by Patti Smith. I snuck out of my bedroom window, I jumped on a Greyhound bus, and I crash-landed in a bigger ghetto than the one I had just escaped from, Rochester, New York. Has a lot in common with Detroit. But with $200 in my back pocket and a notebook full of misanthropic rantings and sporting, I know as I still do, it's mysterious, ain't it, a baby face, which belied a hustler's instinct and a killer urge to destroy everything that had inspired me. I really didn't give a flying fuck if the Bowery smelled like dog shit. I mean, I wasn't expecting the toilets at CBGB's to be the bookend to Duchamp's urinals, but then again, maybe 1977 had more in common with 1917 than anyone would have imagined at the time. Now, New York City during the late 1970s and early 80s was a beautifully ravaged slag like Detroit. Impoverished, neglected, after suffering from decades of abuse and battery, she stunk of sex and drugs and aerosol paint. Her breath hung heavy, a sweet tubercular, sticky and viscous. She leaked from every pore like a sexy corpse, unable to give up the ghost, like Detroit, right? It was like a succubus that fed on new meat and fresh blood, who in turn suckled on her like greedy parasites, alchemizing her putrefaction into a breeding ground of intoxicating fauna, a contaminated nursery overrun with toxic belladonna, a deadly nightshade whose blossoms mocked death by embracing a life which defied death, which in turn mocked everything fucking else. And you got a right to mock the rest of this fucking country. Because you know here, you can't run from the fucking truth or what reality is. Because reality hits here harder than any place else. That ain't New York, that ain't LA, that ain't San Francisco, ain't Chicago. It's fucking Detroit. It's what New York was. Long before, and this will happen to you, so I'm warning you, stay here and be here now. Give it 10 years. This shit's gonna be like the hipster crits on the Lower East Side now in Williamsburg and Greenpoint. But long before the family-friendly gentrification and capital gain criminality whitewashed New York City of all its kaleidoscopic perversions in order to make it safe for anyone who could afford the ridiculous rents charged for shoebox-sized apartments, the Lower East Side, like Detroit now, played crash pad, shooting gallery, and bordello to dozens of art school dropouts, avant noise musicians, radical poets, no-budget filmmakers, and fly-on-the-wall photographers who all lived in glorious squalor in cheap tenement flats, spitting distance from each other's front windows. Now, I don't know how it is now here, but in my day, and I hope it's kind of the same on this front at least, it was a drug-fueled, no-holes-barred, blood-soaked pornucopia of art terrorists documenting their personal descent into the bowels of an inferno in a city which felt like the lunatics had fucking taken over the asylum. Now, we can break that down into a few ways, and to me, when the lunatics are winning, that ain't so bad, because it's better than the religious fanatics. And that's who's right, or the capitalist banksters, the real fucking criminality. You know, creativity is like a rogue virus. It spontaneously combusts. It splatters the brain matter of its host carriers across a finite terrain for a fleeting amount of time, but it forever stains the landscape. And historically, for instance, the hippie radicals, you know, they flocked to hate Ashbury during the Summer of Love, seeking revolution before the acid wore off. And the heavyweight Southern African Americans migrated north looking for paid work and ended up singing the blues in Chicago in the 1940s. And the devil himself hollered when he got his great balls of fire down in Memphis, right, and Nashville during the 1950s. And the scandalous theatrics and outrageous decadence of Germany's Weimar Republic during the 1920s, well, that fostered both an uprising in prostitution and performance art. And if you don't know who Anita Berber is, please check her out, or The Voluptuous Panic, because those are important books about where performance art started. started. And it made the golden age of Hollywood in the dirty 30s seem absolutely fucking quaint by comparison. The boisterous orgy that had begun in Andy Warhol's factory in the swinging 60s had become a bloated Technicolor corpse, kicked to the curb by the gutter punks and no-wave nihilists of the late 1970s, whose idea of a good time was defined by how much noise they could make, how much art they could create, and how much fucking trouble they could cause before the cops were called in to close down the goddamn after-party. Now, like the anti-art invasion, and this is where I relate, because basically I'm a conceptualist, I'm a confrontationalist, I'm fucking Dada. I feel like I relate more to the Dadas than the British punk scene. Ain't nothing in common with me. I ain't punk, I was never punk. I'm fucking no wave, which means I'm Dada. And like the anti-art invasion of Dada and the surrealist pranksters who shadowed them, they had a fucking blast pissing all over everybody's expectations of what art was. No Wave was a collective bowel-cleansing caterwaul which spat forth a collective of extreme artists who defied category, despised convention, defiled the audience, refused to compromise, and has consequently influenced and informed pop fucking culture as well as mainstream media ever since 1977, bitch. It's only a movement in retrospect. Post-Ellen Vega's pre-punk two-piece appropriately named band Suicide, and before pop-punk grunge Sonic Youth, second wave, Swans, third wave, New York City was the devil's dirty litter box. No Wave, in my opinion, is the bastard offspring of Taxi Driver, Times Square, The Son of Sam, The Blackout in 1977, The Dud of the Summer of Love, The Hate Fuck of Charles Manson, The Hell of the Vietnam War, Kent fucking State, The Kennedy assassinations. It was a mad collective of death-defiant miscreants desperate to rebel against the apathetic complacency of a zombie nation dumbed down by sitcoms, disco, fast food, and professional wrestling. Or, if we bring it up to date, dumbed down now by their iPads and iPhones and video games and internet fucking dating where nothing is fucking real, so none of this must be fucking real. Whatever. Yeah, we were, and some of us, thank you, still fucking are, angry. Oh yeah, you got that right. But now I'm paid, you know, that was pretty smart, paid to be fucking angry. Because in my personal life, I'm having as good a time as I fucking can before this whole thing crashes down in my head. You got it. Yes. Party ain't over. And when it's my funeral party, twice as hard, baby. And I don't even know how many drugs I'm gonna need to kill me because I can't even get high because I am drugs now. Yes. We were angry, ugly, snotty, and loud. We used music and art as a battering ram and a form of psychic self-defense against our own naturally violent tendencies and extreme reaction against everything that the 1960s had promised but failed to deliver. A collective mania that shot through the night skies of a decade riddled with the aftermath of all of the failures and frustrations that had come before it. But trust me on this, because beneath the scowls of derision and the antagonism and the acrimony, the beautifully hideous harangues and the nearly unbearable shrill, that desperate soundtrack of our own fucking lives, which all of our lives defined, we were all just howling with fucking delight. We were laughing like lunatics at the brink of the apocalypse in a madhouse the size of all New York fucking city, man. We were thrilled, and you better be thrilled, because this is all you fucking got, is the people that are here together with you now, so you better be friends, because who else is out there that gives a shit about this shit? It's us, and that's it. Yeah, against the freaks and the outcasts who somehow, for some reason, had all decided to run to Land's End and all at once scream their bloody fucking heads off. And that's what No Wave is. That's what it was to me, and that's what it is now. I think I'm in the right place. What you say? What you say?
Where are we supposed to go from there?
Well, Weasel Walter, young enough to be my whatever, I guess he was greatly influenced by me, and that makes me mighty fucking proud because he's one of the most masterful musicians I know. So why don't you just take it from your perspective there, Weasel?
Jeepers, thanks, Lydia. We kind of talked about what Lydia thinks no wave encompassed, and I think she's right about most of that. She was there. But at the same time, we might argue that it wasn't really a movement at all, and it really didn't mean anything. It really signifies whatever anybody decides it wants to signify. I started getting little trickles of this no wave thing in the 80s, in the mid 80s when I was a young lad, and I got it through magazines and used records and stuff like that because obviously pre-internet information was at much more of a premium, and it went through a tiny little pinprick that you had to look for all the time. So, every once in a while I would I'd find an old Rolling Stone and there would be like a review of a Lydia Lunch album or the Contortions or something.
Only one review in Rolling Stone, however.
Yeah,
Lester Bangs.
Queen of Siam.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had it Xeroxed on my wall, but I was 14, give me a break. But it was mysterious because at the time there was some mainstream press and there were some people in the 70s who were ready for something that pushed punk just a wee bit further, or maybe a whole lot further. It just pushed the whole punk over the cliff and just annihilated the whole village. I think, Lydia talks about no wave as maybe being rooted in Dada, and I think, let's just talk about how this thing started. Either Lydia or Roy Trakin just sort of...
My twin.
Yeah, just coined this term as a joke in a review at one point.
Well, I was very anti-everything. I was no. So, but I'm not taking responsibility for the crimes of others. Go on.
I think instead of new wave, somebody said, fuck that, this is no wave. So does that mean anything? Maybe not, but at the time, I guess what classically, in retrospect, we're going to call the no wave, started in New York City. And it probably started, it's not like it was a new idea. I mean, some of the concepts in the music that would be called no wave have been around a long, long time. I mean, Lydia could tell you what she thinks the influences are. I mean, maybe Suicide, would be one of the first bands, although not usually called a no-wave band. In 1971, they were making a hell of a lot of racket.
They were the first band I saw when I went to New York, and they were my first friends. And I originally went to New York thinking I was going to do spoken word, but it didn't exist at that point. It was post-Patti Smith, rock and roll. I mean, I started to do music to get the words out. But Suicide were my first friends. Now, that's a lucky fucking break, because they didn't have any friends, and neither did I, so we just hung out together.
If you don't know who Suicide was, and you should be ashamed of yourself if you don't, but I won't shame you here tonight. Suicide was a duo of New York City-based musicians, one Alan Vega and one Marty Rev. Not their real names, but let's not worry about that.
Or their hair.
Yeah, but they were coming out of this sort of weird, post-beatnik, sort of nihilist attitude, and ultimately the quintessential Suicide instrumentation was one terrifyingly, maybe, one vocalist and one keyboardist, but maybe you can describe them a little better.
Well, Alan Vega is a man possessed at that time. I mean, literally, I know Thurston Moore was that one show I specifically am talking about because there were 9 other people, him and me. And Alan Vega had just such a sense of self-possession. He was so right, he knew, in what he was doing, which was basically to destroy bullshit music and get to the emotion of it by mixing both beat and street. And actually, I saw a flyer that said Suicide 1973 punk, but they meant punk meaning sex punk. So here's music that's so electrically annoying over this passionate, dirty-looking street hustler with a bad wig sometimes, slapping himself in the face with a microphone to get your attention. It was just beauty.
Well, as she said, they were known to play to empty rooms and or to clear rooms quickly. Later on, they would open for The Clash in the UK, and there would be a riot that would be released as a record. So
I'm so sad nobody's ever riot. Of course, it's with Teenage Jesus, my first group. It's hard to have a riot in 10 minutes or less. It's gotta build.
Well, if we skip forward to 1975. We're going to talk about the band Mars that was originally called China, and most of those guys went to college in Florida, and they decided to move to the big city. And they kind of started out as this weird sort of art damaged, almost kind of like Velvet Underground kind of rock band who couldn't really play at all.
Mars, I saw Mars when they were called China. I saw Flyer. I was bopping around as a young teenage runaway and staying wherever, and I saw some poster flyer that said China, and I went to see it. And Mars was definitely my biggest musical influence at the time, because this was just personal insanity elevated to the stage. And I'm like, they're so fucking nuts. I'm so fucking nuts. They can do it. I can do it. Oh yeah. So Mars, which was on the No New York album, eventually produced by Brian Eno with the DNA and the Contortions, they were actually my biggest influence. China Berg, at the time Connie Berg, her guitar playing, which is like an ethereal razor blade against your esophagus, that said, you know, the guitar can be a pretty assaultive weapon. I think I need to pick one up.
Well, let me ask you a question. So when Mars was doing what they were doing in like, well, it's kind of like they didn't play for a while. They rehearsed a lot, and then they finally played in like 76 or something. Now, obviously, there was no term, no wave, and obviously, they didn't really have many peers in the scene. I mean, what do you think they were seen as, or what was their position?
Art-damaged college students. I mean, a lot of the people out of No Wave, there was a big collective that came out of St. Petersburg, which had a very liberal college there, and also had the Salvador Dali Museum, and people in Mars, DNA, even Muriel Cervenka, which is Exene Cervenka's sister, Survival Research Laboratory, which went to the West Coast, Exene, who went to Form X. I think Arto Lindsay was down there from DNA,
Yep.
and the original bass player of Teenage G's. Many people were going to university in St. Petersburg, Florida, and they rushed up for some reason, like moths to flame, to New York. And then there was also a Cleveland infusion. But Mars, I don't think, had any peers, but they were truly so fucking weird. They had no idea how weird they really were. The lead singer would make faces on stage he did not know he made, and they were terrifying. It was like 4 different people in 4 different bands in a small room the size of an asylum, just going crazy. And I think the big divide between what was to come or what was happening in Britain is that in Britain it was like, we're all in it together. This is a movement against the social injustice. In No Wave, it's more like, we're all so personally fucking nuts that we're just each in different rooms playing, sounding nothing alike, against the cacophony that's already in our head, trying to get 1 or 2 of those voices out. And Mars was like 4 voices at once going fucking nuts.
So if we're going to define No Wave, let's use exclusion and elitism as part of it.
I think No Wave is one of the only movements, again in retrospect, where if you say punk or country or funk or jazz, and jazz is very broad, and these other terms are too, but you know what kind of music falls within that parameter. You know the sound of those genres, but with No Wave, what you know is that none of it is going to sound like any of it, except it's going to be dissident, it's going to be angular, ugly, audience unfriendly, and sound like sick people vomiting their brains.
So why in 1976 or 77 would a person move to the sort of neglected, crumbling place called New York City?
Absolute inspiration of what you read in Rock Scene or Cream magazine or any of those other magazines, and the fact that I got to New York with $200. That was a lot of money in '73. The first apartment I paid for cost $75 a month. And I could like work for 10 minutes or 20 minutes on the street and get enough money to eat every day by claiming I was working for cancer and just taking those dollar bills. You didn't need to make a lot of money to get 75. That's after I decided to pay rent, but it was just, it was so broke. Nobody paid attention. It was insane. It was a magnet for those who knew that everything else was coming towards this bullshit. We were so lied to that why not go to the most brutalized? It's like going to the most battered woman you can find because you know that she's got something to offer you that nobody else can. That's why we went to New York. It's like there must be a pile of gold under that shit, and we weren't talking money. We were talking gold. Yeah.
So let's move forward just a hair. You finally run away from home for the last time in the mid-'70s, and you come to New York. And then how do you see this social scene of these No Wave bands coming together?
I got there with nothing. I went to a bar. There was Wayne County, who was my pen pal 1 or 2 times, right? Wayne County, Jane County. Amen.
Hey, sweetie.
Hey, yeah. I'm like, Wayne, you're my pen pal. I'm 17, looking like I do now, and there's this bad band on stage, so I just pick the weakest, cutest one and say, hey, I'm homeless, take me home. And he does, and I just don't move out. And I move into Kitty Bruce's loft, Lenny Bruce's daughter, as she's moving out, and I, like, you know, bop him one time and say, that's it, no rent, no dick licking, sorry, but I'm in now. And I just thought I was going to do spoken word. And actually, people, Lenny Kaye of the Patti Smith Group would entertain my terrible matricidal, homicidal, father-killing poems. And I met James Chance not long after that, probably at a concert. He was the most sour person beside myself I'd ever seen. I'm like, you got to be my friend because you're that fucking angry. And I think just because there was so much going on, I don't even know how we all got in for free always night after night, but it was brewing by that time. Shit was percolating. You just went to Max's. You just went to CBGB's. You just went.
So what was the leap between being a poet and playing a guitar?
Well, there was no place to do poetry except in Lenny Kaye's face, and that was getting tired to him and me. I mean, and I knew that the words were important, so I think it was Jody Harris who was going to then be in the Contortions. Somebody gave me a broken bass, 3 or 4 string guitar, and I'm like, and James Chance of the Contortions had to take me in because the hippies did kick me out from no dick licking and no rent paying, and that got tired. And James was living on his parents', you know, stipend in a shit apartment, and wanting to be a musician and playing, you know, bad jazz at loft parties. So I just started with the words and wrote the music, which was like a primal terroristic scream from the inside out. Basically, with that was like the sounds of my radio frequency, and get some words over that. It just made natural sense. And asked James to be in the band, wrote some songs. They had to come out somewhere, and then took, as everyone did it that day, to the audition stage at CBGB's on a Monday night. And anyone who is a performer, wants to be a performer, let me tell you the key to my success. The minute, it's your first time you're gonna perform, you're 17, I think. This is weird shit. This is so ugly. I mean, this is ugly by nature. This is born that way. I was walking to the stage, and you gotta think, what is this 17-year-old who can't play the guitar or sing, who's gonna make a fucking racket that's gonna be over within 10 minutes, looking that cute, being that brutal? And the thought came to me, do I have panic? I'm like, no, I cause panic. That was like a light that went on, and I never, ever had stage fright. I'm like, I am not here to panic or to have stage fright. I am here to cause panic. And I can assure you, that first 10 minutes of my creative life, the panic had just begun. Just doing what comes natural, Weasel.
Well,
natural.
So then...
Natural-born terrorist.
Then, you know, there was like a very focused kind of club scene in New York back then, and you know there were venues like Max's Kansas City and CBGB's. Those are sort of the most known ones, and you know the so-called no-wave bands, kind of like, I think those were basically about the only places the bands could play.
This is the trajectory of my scheming. So I don't know, I'm bouncing from place to place. I lived with one of the guys in Mars for a while. I lived with James Chance. I was homeless, I wasn't gonna get a job. I didn't wanna work for rent. I didn't wanna do what that entailed, even if it's 75, so I'm just jumping around. And around 18, I'm down in Tribeca, which didn't have the name Tribeca then. It was just a no man's land down below Canal Street. And I see all these buildings with signs that say for sale or for rent, and I call one number, and I just take a chance. I'm 18 fucking years old, looking, you know, kind of like this. And I go to meet the landlord, and I'm like, you know, if you let me move into this abandoned building and maybe show some action in there, someone's gonna wanna buy it. Now this fool thought that was a good idea. And it just happened to be next to Donnie Christensen and Jody Harris of the Contortions, who let me run electricity out of their building. There was no running water, no lights. It's like most of Detroit, right? It's like if I came here now, I'd just find an abandoned building, move in, and run some steel electricity. But I was pretty intuitive, and I was there for about a good 6 months, and we started then, that's where I started rehearsing Teenage Jesus. I was given some broken instruments, started rehearsing them, and then, I don't know how, no doubt sexually explicit jobs in back rooms, got enough money to get an apartment with Bradley Field, the drummer, and then we set up a rehearsal space where DNA and Mars and occasionally the Contortions could all rehearse. Until then, it was in a non-electric, non-water building running one power strip. And, you know, Teenage Jesus, one drum, one bass guitar, didn't take much.
So already in like 1978, all the bands are being covered in like local publications like New York Rocker, and there's something called well, it's a little later, there's something called the East Village Eye, and you know, stuff like this.
I think that's the one where I called Patti Smith the dirty old hippie, which caused a lot of havoc to come out.
I think you're right.
She was.
But it was interesting.
At that time.
I think in the late 70s, you know, most of this stuff was located, I mean, it seems like most of you were located around the Lower East Side or the East Village in New York City, so it was very local. It wasn't about like driving 20 miles to go do something.
Nobody went above 14th Street. I mean, I lived first in Chelsea. Once I moved, nobody went above 14th Street unless we went to Studio 54 to try to, you know, cause some trouble.
Or Max's Kansas City.
Max's Kansas City. That's the only time. That's
yeah.
the only time.
So, I mean, the localism, you know, the concept that there were magazines, there were venues, there were bands, and it was all located in a very small area. I mean, that seems to be another part of like why this is even seen as a movement.
I think the defining part of why it was seen as a movement is because it wasn't just about music. For instance, I'll give you one example. Everyone's doing films and making music, or making music and painting, or painting and working on some other photography. Everyone had, because it was so creative, because that's all we had was our art, and we used the art as a psychic self-defense or as a projection of the insanity of the city at that time. So for instance, Teenage Jesus was offered, as many bands are, for very little pay, but still, every Monday in 1 month at Max's Kansas City. So for that event, I'd already started doing films, and film is a very important part of the no wave movement. There were a lot of women filmmakers at the time. Vivian Dick, I don't know if Tessa was already starting making films, Tessa Hughes Freeland, Beth and Scott B. And I invited Beth and Scott B, who had made some films with me, to show films those 4 nights. Well, instead of just showing what they had, they decided to make what I think is the first, like, I'll call it kind of punk, although it's no wave, serial. And they shot 4 episodes, 1 a week, with a lot of people that were on the scene, from Walter Lure of the Heartbreakers to Anna Sui, who became a fashion designer, to John Lurie, to myself, to members of the Contortions. So literally, they were creating a 20 or 30-minute movie a week to show with Teenage Jesus, which would do a 10 to 13-minute set. And this was really the spirit that made it so exciting and creative then, that made it so fantastic, is that you had to do it, and you had to do it now. There's no shitting around waiting for the trust funds, waiting for the museums, waiting for mommy's money. You created with what you fucking had, and you did it, and you showed it, and other people wanted to see it because we all had the same corrosive sensation about everything outside of this can take a fucking shit, man, because they just don't fucking get it.
So
they don't get it.
To get back to the definition,
you get it or you don't. That's my motto.
You mentioned the corrosive attitude. One of the things that appealed to me when I was listening to the music as a teenager.
14-year-old yippers-snapper?
Yes. One of the things that appealed to me about the no wave stuff was that it was so black and so hateful and nihilistic that it turned into comedy. It's sort of like you flipped it just slightly, and it was like...
I like to call it the happy haters. I mean, that's why I like hanging around Weasel. He's a real fucking hateful motherfucker, but like me, it's weird. He's really happy. Like, we're happy to hate. Like, we're happy when we're hating, and then when we're not hating, we're still kind of happy. It's kind of perverse, but that's why it works. Otherwise, boom, boom, boom.
I got nothing.
Yeah, you got everything, son. It's just a matter of perspective. Yeah, ha, ha.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, from me.
So by May 1978, these bands are getting a little press, and they're playing locally, and some people are showing up. And then all of a sudden, someone had the bright idea to do a festival, a 2-night festival at a place called Artist Space in May 1978. And the bands were Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, the Contortions, Mars, DNA, 6 other ones that I could name if you really care. I'll tell you later, or read a fucking book and it'll tell you. But needless to say, someone brought, did Adele bring Brian Eno to this thing?
I think Adele Bertay may have been working somehow with Brian Eno. I don't know, but yeah. Brian Eno comes to the show, I guess.
And he's impressed.
But I am not.
What's funny about the show at this point, there's recordings of the show, and there's also pictures, and it still looks like maybe there's like 20 people there.
I'm sure there was.
Yeah, because one of the things that's so funny about history is this big inspirational movement. Someone recently said it's funny how the ratio between how inspirational the no wave was and how many people actually went to the shows was
correct me if I'm wrong, Weasel, but by my twisted Rolodex, I cannot imagine in the USA that Teenage Jesus ever, except for in Canada, played for more than 30 people. I don't think so.
Fair enough.
Now, one slight digression before we get into the Eno chip. For some reason, at that age, I just knew Teenage Jesus had to go to fucking England. We had to start going to Europe because I knew there was not much future for music that extreme here. So I did some hand jobs under the table. I sucked a little dick, but I got that band to Europe where it needed to go. And with the help of a then very young Ice Shirts and Neubauten on the second tour, they put my shit in the jukebox. Alex Hacker of Neubauten was 14 when Teenage Jesus played Berlin, but I think for me, taking the initiative, which is why I'm still active and a lot of those bands are not, is because I knew where I had to go and I had to keep going. And if I wanted to keep going, it's why I've lived in Barcelona for 8 of the past years of my life, because I can only do everything that I do as an artist in Europe. And that shit's got to change. And that's why I'm coming back here, because shit is changing now. Carry on, son. Brian Eno. Let's wrap that up with the Eno.
Well, Brian Eno saw this festival and he was interested, and he had a little bit of clout, and he thought it would be a little bit of hair. He thought it would be a good idea to record these groups and put it on a compilation. So, 4 of the groups talked him out of putting 6 of the other groups on it.
I have to take responsibility in some ways for No New York, and I will blame myself for this, because I just thought compilations, they're so silly. It's like one song, even though Teenage Jesus, one song is every song, I'll admit that. Why one song by 10 bands? Why don't you focus on the most diverse, the most divergent? And somehow, I think because he was so delusional, because he'd literally fucked himself into the hospital during that period. Yes, a man that ugly can fuck enough to end up in the emergency room because his dick explodes. It's true. And I loved Eno, and I loved Roxy Music, and I love Here Come the Warm Jets. By this point, airplane music was infecting his fucking brain like a virus that needed to be annihilated. It just happened to come out of his dick. I don't know. I'm just saying, maybe. Sorry, go on.
Well, in June 1978, 4 bands entered that
78?
Big Apple Studio.
I was 21.
Yeah, it was 78. Thing came out, I think.
I was younger. Holy shit.
Thing came out.
It's 19.
Thing came out in, maybe Bob Burt can help me with this. I think it was like summer 79. I think it was like June 79 when it came out.
All right, I was 20.
And of course, by that point, Mars had already broken up because they just thought there was no point in continuing. They played a disastrous final show that like no one showed up to, and they just gave it in. So,
if anybody here hasn't heard the group Mars, that's true insanity. That is such beautiful music. I mean, that is like jazz on real bad acid. And for some of you, that might just be the trip you need. I still sing Mars songs. I want to sing one now. Why aren't we covering Mars? Maybe tomorrow.
Sure, why not? So, I don't know, maybe we're coming to the close of this, but it seems like No Wave
we could do the Mars retrospective. They can't. 2 are dead.
Why not?
Okay, why not? It's a very No Wave concept. Why not?
My point is, the whole No Wave thing might have been dead before it was even born. By the time No New York came out, the first band that spawned it was already like dead and buried. And part of the controversy with fucking nerds about No Wave is like, what is No Wave and what isn't? Like, I always used it as sort of like a tag for like noisy bands of indeterminate style that were like sort of like doing this extrapolation on rock music to the point where it became like, you know, irritating garbage. But then you could argue about that all day. But, you know, ultimately...
Well, to me, it defies tradition. It puts through the meat grinder. It sounds like something you have never heard before, which pretty much sums up your entire fucking career, youngster.
Sorry about
You
that.
are Mr. No Wave. It's true.
Well, I
No Wave
studied the masters.
No Wave is a sound that you have never heard before. And hopefully, which is why Teenage Jesus sets were 10 to 13 minutes. Shortest one was 7 minutes. We will open with a Teenage Jesus instrumental, courtesy of Weasel Walter on guitar. Let me just admit this. As a visionary guitar stylist, I have kicked many people off covering my songs on guitar. Nels Cline being one of them. Weasel Walter is the only man allowed to play because he has studied me so voraciously. My fucking guitar parts. That's all I'm saying.
You're pretty good. It took a 16-year-old girl to like.
Look, it's not that I was good or I was bad. I had a fucking, and this is my issue with music is if you don't have a vision, don't give it a fucking sound. Bottom line, you got a vision, you give it a sound. You want to sound like some other shit, stay in your fucking garage and leave us alone. That's it. No, we don't all need to play music. It's fun, I know, but I don't play music because it's fun. I play music because it hurts people.
Any questions?
Yeah. Any questions? I can ask you. You don't have to. I mean, we just find it all.
Maybe no wave's dead. Maybe it's been dead a long time.
Well, the thing is, it ain't about being alive or dead, because to me it's a fucking spirit, and spirit doesn't die. And the spirit is this: fuck you and fuck me too. You know why? Because no matter what you think about me, I don't care how you look at me, you come at me with love or fucking hate, I'm not gonna stop being who I am and doing what I motherfucking do. You got that? So in a sense, it's pretty fucking gangsterism. Yeah, oh yeah, Dale, that's right, you're fucking no wave, dude. So if you don't have any questions, I'm gonna go smoke a cigarette, have another drink, powder my ass, and we're gonna rock.